You're walking down the street and you see a blue Volkswagen Beetle. Just a car, nothing special. But then over the next few days, you see them everywhere. 3 on your commute, 1 in a parking lot, another in a commercial you barely noticed. It feels impossible, like someone cranked up the Beetle dial on reality itself. Except nothing in reality changed. What changed was you. This is the frequency illusion, sometimes called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, and it's one of the strangest tricks your brain plays on you. The name comes from a guy in the 90s who learned about the Baader-Meinhof group, a German terrorist organization, and then suddenly started seeing references to them everywhere. He needed a name for the experience, so he just used theirs. The term stuck, even though it has nothing to do with German terrorists and everything to do with how your brain decides what's worth noticing. Here's what's happening. Your brain is not perceiving everything around you. That would be impossible. At any moment, there are millions of sensory inputs available. The hum of electricity, the texture of your shirt, every shadow in your peripheral vision. Your brain filters aggressively, selecting a tiny fraction of that information and promoting it to conscious awareness while suppressing everything else. Before you notice that first blue beetle, your brain had categorized blue beetles as irrelevant background noise. They were there, probably in the same numbers they are now, but your attention system had no reason to flag them. They slipped past unnoticed. The moment you noticed one, something shifted. Your brain updated its filter. It created a new category. Blue beetles are now relevant. And once something is marked relevant, your attention system starts scanning for it. This isn't conscious. You're not deliberately looking, but your attentional filter has been reconfigured, and now every time a blue beetle enters your field of vision, it gets flagged and pushed into awareness. This is selective attention, handled by a network at the base of your brain called the reticular activating system. Think of it as a gatekeeper that decides what sensory information gets escalated to higher brain regions. It's constantly evaluating. Is this new, important, dangerous, related to something I care about? If yes, the information gets through. If no, it's suppressed. You never become conscious of it. This filtering is essential because your brain doesn't have the capacity to process everything. Without it, you'd experience something closer to a seizure than perception. But here's the thing. The criteria the reticular activating system uses aren't fixed. They shift based on what's happened recently. When you encounter something novel or personally relevant, the system updates. It starts treating that category as worthy of attention. And because this happens below conscious awareness, you don't realize the update occurred. You just suddenly start noticing things you weren't noticing before. There's a second mechanism working in parallel: confirmation bias. Once you've noticed that first beetle and started wondering if they're everywhere, you've formed a hypothesis. And human brains are terrible at testing hypotheses fairly. We don't naturally seek disconfirming evidence. We seek confirming evidence. So now your attention system is flagging beetles, and every time you see one, it feels like proof. You're not counting the times you don't see beetles. You're not comparing current sighting rates to some baseline. You're just accumulating instances, and each one strengthens your conviction. This creates a feedback loop. The more you notice beetles, the more convinced you become they're common, which makes you more likely to keep noticing them. The illusion becomes self-reinforcing. And because you're unaware your perception has been filtered, it genuinely feels like an objective change in reality. Now add emotional weight. When something matters to you emotionally, your brain tags it. That tag involves the amygdala, which processes emotions and sends signals that say, encode this strongly, pay attention to this. Emotional content doesn't just get remembered better, it captures attention more reliably. If you're excited about something or worried about it, your brain flags related information automatically. You see it everywhere because your amygdala has reprogrammed your attention filters to treat it as significant. And then there's priming. When you encounter a concept, that exposure makes related concepts more mentally accessible. Your memory isn't organized like a filing cabinet. It's more like a web, with concepts connected by associations. Activating one node spreads activation to neighboring nodes. The word doctor makes nurse easier to recognize. Reading about beetles makes beetle-related content easier to notice and process. Each encounter primes you for the next one, keeping the concept active and accessible in your mind. Your brain is also running pattern detection software that's biased toward false positives. Evolutionarily, missing a threat was often fatal. Seeing a threat that wasn't there just wasted energy. So your ancestors who survived were the ones who erred on the side of seeing patterns, even in noise. You inherited that oversensitive detector. You see faces in clouds, meaning in coincidence, patterns in randomness. When you see 3 beetles in a week, your pattern detector says pattern, even though, if you're encountering thousands of cars, seeing any specific feature multiple times by chance is statistically unremarkable. Humans are also terrible, intuitive statisticians. You don't naturally think about base rates or probabilities. You focus on salient instances and ignore the denominator. 3 beetle sightings feels like a lot because you're not thinking about how many total cars you saw, or what percentage of cars are beetles, or how often you'd expect to see one by chance. You just notice the hits and forget the misses. Your memory preferentially encodes confirming instances, creating a distorted record that makes patterns seem more frequent than they are. There's a social dimension too. You mention the beetles to a friend. Now they're primed. They start noticing them. They mention it back to you, which reinforces your sense the pattern is real. You've exported your frequency illusion to someone else, and their confirmations loop back to strengthen yours. This scales. If enough people start talking about something, you create a distributed network all primed to notice the same thing. Each person sees it and thinks their observation is independent confirmation, but it's actually a collection of biased observers reinforcing each other's biases. And now, add algorithms. Social media platforms surface content you're likely to engage with based on recent behavior. Click on an article about beetles, and the algorithm notes it. Now beetle-related content gets boosted in your feed. You see more posts, articles, discussions about beetles, not because they're more common in the world, but because the algorithm inferred they're relevant to you. This creates a feedback loop between your attention and your information environment. You notice beetles physically, which makes you click beetle content online, which makes the algorithm show you more beetle content, which keeps them salient in your mind, which makes you notice them more physically. The algorithmic amplification can create the appearance of a trend even when nothing's changed. A few people experience the cognitive bias. They post about it. The engagement signals popularity to the algorithm. More people see the content. Some start noticing beetles themselves. They post, the algorithm amplifies that too. What started as a handful of people experiencing a frequency illusion becomes a widespread conversation that feels like it's responding to something real. And at a certain point, the conversation itself can create real effects. Enough collective attention can bootstrap an illusion into something that has genuine social consequences. So how do you know if something's really everywhere, or if you just think it is? That's the hard part. You need external verification, data that's independent of your perception, and the social and algorithmic systems amplifying the signal. You'd need vehicle registration data or systematic traffic counts, but most people don't do this. They rely on social proof and their own memory, both of which are contaminated by the same biases. The best you can do is metacognition. Step back and examine your own thinking. Ask, does this thing matter to me emotionally? Did something trigger my attention to it? Am I looking for confirming evidence, or am I open to being wrong? Can I identify the feeling of sudden pattern emergence? That particular texture of experience where something invisible suddenly becomes hypervisible? That's a signal you might be in the grip of an illusion. Consider alternative explanations. The world changed, or you changed, which requires fewer assumptions. Usually, it's the second. Cognitive biases are common and well documented. Genuine sudden increases in the prevalence of specific things are rare. Start with the simpler explanation and only move to the complex one if you have real evidence. The frequency illusion isn't a failure. It's a feature of how cognition works in a world full of repeated patterns. Your brain filters reality aggressively because it has to. It detects patterns because pattern detection kept your ancestors alive. It tags emotional content because emotional content matters. It confirms beliefs because constantly reevaluating everything from scratch would be impossibly inefficient. These mechanisms are useful most of the time. They just occasionally misfire in predictable ways. The illusion becomes a problem only when you mistake it for insight, when you build conclusions on biased perception without recognizing the bias. And the antidote is awareness. Noticing when your certainty might be unfounded, holding beliefs lightly enough to revise them, asking the uncomfortable question, what if I'm wrong? You might never definitively resolve whether blue beetles are actually more common. You might be left with uncertainty, and that's okay. Uncertainty is the appropriate response to insufficient evidence. It's more honest than false confidence. It leaves you open to updating if better information arrives. The next time you feel like you're seeing something everywhere, pause. Consider the possibility that nothing changed except your attention. Recognize that your brain is a meaning-making machine that sees patterns even in noise. Understand that your memory is giving you a highlight reel, not a representative sample. And hold the question open. Sit with the ambiguity. Because that recognition, that metacognitive awareness, is what lets you navigate a reality that's far more uncertain than it feels. Thanks for watching. If this changed how you think about what you're noticing, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you know someone who keeps seeing the same thing everywhere, maybe send this their way. Sometimes the most helpful thing is just knowing your brain is doing exactly what brains do.